Hi, I'm Micah.
Hey, I'm Christa.
Welcome to Bad People, a podcast that seeks to create a safe place to wrestle with life's deeply personal questions. Our aim is to be honest with ourselves first and foremost, to confess where necessary and throw stones at our own glass houses, examining experiences with curiosity and vulnerability. These conversations are not an attempt to provide answers or offer simple platitudes. Rather, our goal is to hold open-ended dialogue around what simply is, and do so from a level playing field, without fear of judgment or shame. Join Christa and I at your own risk as we excavate the ways belief, community, trauma, and relationship has impacted who we both are today.
Awesome. Thanks, Micah. It's funny reading that. I know that's something that you just put together kind of as this podcast has unfolded further, and things that strike me about that is like a safe conversation. I know today we're not super sure exactly, like we know our topic and we know this has been on our hearts. But yeah, that this really will be like an open-ended kind of first time kind of exploring this topic a bit more. And yeah. So let's, I guess, delve into that a bit more in an organic fashion.
Well, last week we were talking about autonomy and realizing our own agency and ability to choose and make choices for ourselves.
Yeah.
And that, I think, kind of leads us to this topic of, what are we calling this?
Yeah, something
this
like
episode.
Exploitation, just that feeling like being used for the benefit of something else, of a system, like where it's funny because I think on the outset of that, just that kind of identifying like, oh, why did I feel empty? Why do I feel empty? Is that possibly because things were taken out of me that maybe were not helpful for me going forward? So, and I don't know. I think you said that maybe that resonates a bit for you.
Yeah, I think it's always so much more like, I don't know, these things are always so easy to, or not easy, but they become clearer, I think, in hindsight.
Totally.
When you've like walked forward and then, because I mean, I think I can definitely identify some times in my life where looking back, I was like, that could be defined as exploitation, but was it? Because I was also kind of voluntarily giving my time.
Totally.
But then you think like, well, the system's kind of set up to like, for exploitation of people's time to take place.
Yeah.
But then also, I just think back to like the physical feelings I have had in those times of like just constantly feeling kind of like tired and emotionally depleted and like and anxious like around people and systems. But anyway,
yeah, I think that it's funny talking about because obviously we're talking about, or we have been talking about like the church, or I reference it marriage or family or even friendship dynamics, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's really great for us again to say that it's not about the people necessarily. It is about this system that is created in the dynamic that exists within, when you're working either at a church or when you're involved in a large community like that. Or in a marriage or with friendships, and then also in family systems, whether it's one
or a work environment.
Work environments too. Yeah. Or where like you're the parent and you have children, or you are the child. So I think the distinction that we're trying to make a lot of times is like, right, when we talk about the hero and the villain, is not going like we're somehow over here saying that we're the heroes and that's a villain over there in the people. It's saying, oh, wow, look at this group of people, or look at these two people that have gotten together. And then somehow the workings of that, how they're relating to each other, that system has not gone well.
Yeah.
And I think even in one of the previous episodes with us starting to go like, oh, right, that body, like touching ourselves and kind of going like, are we okay? Like our breathing isn't right. And that those first connections to self and going, okay, maybe I'm not okay. And then from that, then going like, am I even allowed to think that I'm not okay? Like that, like oh, wait, I am separate than the people around me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, again, talking about the visceral feelings and then autonomy, and then now to go like, okay, as we start to think for ourselves and possibly voice that a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you do that in community, you do that with the systems you're involved with. How is that then received? And that's, I think, where the exploitation, again, not that somebody's doing that necessarily to us, but it's just what's considered normal. It's always explained away, or there's some element that makes this thing that's
it's the culture
helpful. Yeah, like the norm. Yeah. Right. And we saw that. I mean, yeah. How did that play out for you in different areas of your life?
Yeah. I mean,
even bringing it back to your family, because I think that's interesting. Like as a child, you talked about having to either parents or parent your siblings, or you were used for, like you might have to have given financial support. So all of that might have existed like, centuries ago, where kids, you kind of all work together and stuff. But do you think that was healthy or not, or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's so like complex, but I feel, I mean, as a sibling and a kid who was part of like a big family, and there were 8 of us, like sometimes it could feel like you just existed just to, to help your parents, or to like do the dishes and do all the cleaning in the house, because that needed to be done. There were so many people, but I mean, that would be one tiny example of growing up and feeling like, oh, I'm just here to like do the cleaning and, be a help.
And we're like back in the day where people could argue, well, you're doing that for survival, right? Like that's not necessarily a bad system. Where I think it gets tricky is when that is then equated to like spiritual health, or where you're sort of like, well, are you a good kid? Well, if a good kid would do the dishes, a good kid, or somebody that's God-fearing would respect the parent or whatever.
Yeah, and
that subtlety, that exploitation, I think, kind of exists.
Yeah, which is, I think, where it gets really interesting, is because the parents were maybe not necessarily at fault for raising their kids that way, because that's also sometimes like the culture, right? Like, even in that generation, like,
totally,
you have kids to further your
it's like
life, like survival. Like you have to have a kid to carry on your name, and so,
or to like sustain a farm.
Totally, like in one sense, you do have kids to like help you with your labor and to like, just maintain society. Like we need workers and all that. But maybe today, where it's getting, I think maybe I've experienced more of the like, oh, in hindsight, that was similar to exploitation, would be more in like, like a church setting, where, we were part of like, it was like a mega church, so lots of people attending, but we also had a whole bunch of like students that would come every year, and, part of their like practicum, so part of their like course was to be volunteering in certain areas in church. And so basically it was named volunteering, but they didn't really have any choice about
voluntelling.
It was more like, this is where you're going to volunteer.
Yeah, it's not fun.
And I mean, that was always an interesting dynamic, because often so much time was given to like church and college. And yes, when you're going to like a school and you're on campus, like it's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
But there's also like the understanding that you need to earn money and make a living and be able to like house yourself, and clothe yourself.
Yeah.
So you're going to be given like space to also have a job and like do that kind of thing. But often those things were like quite in tension within our like context, where people were looked down on, or kind of shamed, or just guilt tripped if they were like skipping church or skipping volunteer things to like go and work a shift, or
and
Yeah.
It's funny because I do see, even though you were just saying like, oh, I see that more in the church, I think the foundation was laid for you in your family system, like where you weren't necessarily encouraged to flourish just as Micah on your own. It was always to serve like the greater...
the authority.
Exactly. The authority or just the collective or whatever. And same with, I think that a dynamic exists within the church. And I think folks like us can be that much more sort of drawn to that, where you're like, oh, this feels familiar. Like, right, I don't need to maybe like worry about myself or how like the impact of the negative or positive impact of this on me as a person, because I exist for God or I exist for the benefit of others. And it's not that much about me. And again, where we're kind of like always questioning like what's selfish and what is selfishness, and like that kind of like taking care of one's own personhood kind of just gets like, oh, right, we're going to trust the authority to tell us what's like good or bad for our own selves. Yeah. And again, I think that is tricky because it's almost like like when I look back, I'm like, it's almost like I was groomed into thinking like, that's just totally fine. Yeah. And again, like, I don't think that was coming from like a bad place. I think that's sort of what we all hope for, but it really does put the control and the authority and the onus on someone else to then be able to tell me what's okay or not for my own life. Yeah. And then possibly I'm giving them the power to hurt me or not, right?
Totally. And I think maybe that's where for me it gets to the grit of exploit, because I feel like we can all be guilty of that, like, of course, and it's so messy. But I feel like when maybe you're not encouraged to like think for yourself and have your own mind and just question things, whether that's in church or anyone, like if something they're saying or the way they're behaving like isn't sitting right with you, like instead of being like, oh, I'm going to push that thought away, but kind of entertaining it and being like, oh, wait a minute, like, why am I feeling this? Or what are they saying? Like, do I agree with it? Or when you don't have that, then I don't know, the draw to like belong as well is so strong for people. So we're all of us are susceptible to this. Like we all want to belong and be part of a community, and like that powerful like desire in us, which is totally valid and necessary. Like we need community, but that can often override a lot of things. And I think like maybe that's it, is like where, are we allowed to dialogue around things, or are we just accepting them because someone with a title says it? And like that's where I'm like, there is something to these cults where people have committed mass suicide. Like where is the line where you're like, there's a lot of power in having that control over people.
Totally. And you like, a lot of times we kind of mask that by saying, but it's for like divine purpose, or so that people can, come to know Jesus or whatever. But that gets tricky because what will we justify? Like literally holy wars are justified for that same reason, we're going to bring God's justice, or we're going to, or separate people from their families or whatever else, right? Yeah. So some pretty, historically atrocious things have happened in the name of like, I don't know, trying to believe somebody's, or hearing what somebody has to say about who God is and what God's intention is for humanity. Yeah. And going, okay, I'm going to back that to some really extreme ends. But like where do we kind of think about what is good for us and not going to hurt us, and then also what's good for others and not going to hurt them too? Because I think there's a responsibility, just like you said, like sometimes we're guilty of exploiting other people in like the name of something good. But really to take a second and really analyze like, what are we justifying, quote unquote, for the sake of what else, right? And I think anytime where, often, I think you and I talked about being exhausted or feeling disconnected and lonely. Yeah. those are very common themes within the church.
Yeah.
A lot of people too feeling very unsafe to fully be themselves,
Yeah.
in fear of like, oh no, if somebody knew this, I could lose my job, or I could be thought of like less than, and therefore like preying on that, and then seeing that, like to what end? Like what would people benefit? Yet that is like exploiting kind of like their humanity and like their authenticity to uphold what? Like, are we so afraid of? It's almost like, so I don't know. There's just weird things that have gone on.
I know, it's so like layered, I feel like.
And they consistently go on. But if we talk about more of our own personal experience, I know for myself, and that's the thing, like I participated in my own exploitation, right? I'm like, I knew that I wasn't feeling okay. And then I started to like wrestle through things and started going like, wait, I don't know if I fully agree with these things. And I don't believe that actually. And then starting to like kind of work that out and then going, well, I want to almost like prove that like, like maybe I am good, or that I am worthy of God, or whatever those things were. And then seeing like that I don't want to say, because again, I want to own what I can own, because I don't put this on other people that, like the church, like the people, because I know these humans. I'm still in a relationship with some of them, right? Like, I don't think they sat there and were like, oh, I'm going to use this against her.
No.
Also, I think could visually see that I wasn't okay. And I also knew I wasn't okay. So but yet consistently like, oh, it's for the kingdom. Oh, you're suffering. Oh, that's that weird gaslighting kind of going like, yeah, you are going to tithe and it's going to be painful, but it's for God.
Yeah.
And that
there is a sacrifice like, to it. Yeah.
Like, I'm in pain. I'm not okay. Yeah. Then instead of us going like, let's put the brakes on, we're like, no, that means that you're doing God's work.
Yeah.
And that's like, that's not a good thing, I don't think. And that's my opinion on that. And I know a lot of people would disagree.
Yeah. Well, that's just interesting. Yeah. Because like that question of like what sacrifice is enough, or like when do you sacrifice until?
Yeah.
And like that's things where for me, I like if I'm going to ask those questions, I have to follow them all the way through. Like, would I give my life? Like literally.
But that's the call. Like, that's who we model our life after, is Jesus, who gave his life. Yeah. But again, we often like to forget that he did that so we don't have to be him, right? Yeah. It's like we're not called to the same, I don't know. I say that lightly. I'm like, we're not called to the same things as Jesus.
Yeah.
There's lots of places in scripture where it's kind of like,
where that's implied though.
Exactly.
Yeah. And where like Paul and many of the disciples, like, their lives ended the same horrific way. Yeah. And thinking of that, like, these days, I'm like, I know that I wouldn't have the courage to do that. Like,
no.
But, I mean...
But does that make you again, like, what does that say about Micah? Because I want to say, like, outside of the church context, people, like, would be like, yeah, good. Like, that's like an unwritten, like, good that you don't want to die for the sake of, like, a faith that, like, why is that even happening to you? Like, that's what people outside of the church would say. And folks that are inside the church almost like, we're like, wait, is that bad that I don't want to, lay down my life to the point of, like, that kind of persecution?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the only instance where I can think maybe I would do something and put my life on the line is like where my kids are involved.
Exactly.
Where it's like something is made, like, and we see that played out in like the news and in like people do that to protect their children.
Yeah. Which again, like, makes sense to me why God would engage with us like that, on the same level. Whereas I'm like, I don't see.
An extreme example of that is like terrorism, where the beliefs are so fundamental that these people are willing to sacrifice their lives in order to do something that's going to make an impact that they hope is going to have some implication that bolsters their faith their outlook
literally seeing
on the world.
Other people, as enemies, and them the villain hero
enemies of God, or
exactly. And then so then you've won, but then there's also the weird reward that happens after, which is like you'll get 1,000 virgins or whatever in the afterlife. Which, again, I'm like, right, okay, so that's like, I don't like, that's exploitation, I think, where you've deluded someone to believe something like that. It's not true. But I see that dynamic playing out for us in like really, obviously not that kind of way. But in subtleties where we're willing to sacrifice time with our children. Or authenticity is a huge one. Like, let's not even be that dramatic where it's about us and our kids. It's just about showing up truly as ourselves and going like, no, actually this Sunday, I'm not going to be at church, and I'm actually not going to do community group or whatever else, because it's actually not good for me at this moment. And I don't need to be afraid. I don't need to be like saying, oh, this person made me feel bad. No. Just me, myself. I don't need to be afraid that someone's going to judge me and think that I'm not a good person or not part of the team. It's like, no, I'm just telling you, like, this is how I feel. Right? And so I don't know. I feel like it's a balance too, because like I understand that in community you need to have some sort of organization, some sort of system when you're dealing with like numbers of people, right? For it to be cohesive. And I mean, like in a family setting, you don't want like, I mean, everybody just like jumping off the walls and throwing, So like that balance, but I think that's kind of hard to strike of like, we live in community and yet we be authentic and be ourselves without fear of judgment, but yet judgment sort of always and shame always somehow which ended up taking the driver's seat. Right? Which makes sense that we're always butting up against that. At the same time, when community goes on overdrive and we see like corporate community, like, which again, in theory, seems so amazing to like have all these people that are either like singing the same song or like kind of agreeing. Like that's what we would see in church, right? But that's not at all corporate community. Like everyone is so different in that setting, but yet somehow we're just supposed to like all, I don't know, show up all
assimilate.
Like, and to continue like once a week we do this huge corporate gathering. Which I mean, like on the surface as well, I think you can think you're in community too, and then you realize how surfacey it actually is. And then you can realize as well, like, oh no, like there's, like being part of, that's just taken a different form for me over the years of like being part of a church community was like everything because it's nice to feel also part of like something bigger than yourself. And like you're part of something that's like making a difference. And is that like, again, the longing for belonging? And then like that idea that, like that feels really good. That then used and kind of, sanctified as like, oh, this is holy and this is what God wants. Because that's where like that gets tricky. Like, I'm not sure that that's actually true. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, we were talking a little bit before about tithing and about how we gather every week on a Sunday, and part of like the ritual of doing that is also like has to do with tithing and things like that, right? So it's just, I don't know, it's interesting to kind of like take all of those things and go, like what is the true purpose behind this gathering, or us calling it community, or us saying that this is like a holy space? Is it really like genuine and true, or is it possibly, does it have like another intention?
Totally. And that's, maybe that's where we're getting at, is like, is true community about like getting to know each other and like making space for each other and our like authentic selves and sort of encouraging people to do that and be like honest? Or is this community about like another agenda, which I think, I don't know, for me and my involvement in church, that has been definitely a factor. Like after a while, the reason why I felt like I wanted a break from church was because it did feel like there was not an ulterior, but that the agenda was not really like Well, I mean, just plain speaking, like it didn't even really feel like it aligned with what Jesus taught.
Totally.
So then there was that disconnect of like this corporate Christianity.
Totally.
And then like, but hang on, like Jesus was like kind of against that way of doing things.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, if we're just going to look at that discrepancy, like I feel like that's a big one for where I was like, well,
wait a sec.
Yeah, if Jesus is kind of the one that inspires me here, and that I feel like said many things that were like so powerfully true.
Yeah.
But we're not really outworking those as a church community. And like, I think that's a tricky thing because like,
and when we're kind of saying that this is like the right way and God's way, and we're saying that it's holy and set apart and all those things, but what we're selling is not necessarily, and wholeness and like authenticity should be at like the forefront of kind of like why we even gather or why, right? Like that is a huge aspect of like what Jesus allows for us or brings for us.
Yeah.
And then if that's not actually happening, because that's what I found. Like as I kind of process everything, I'm like, oh, like so much emptiness, so much like lack of like truly being able to communicate like how I honestly feel, and being kind of felt, like feeling like a prisoner, or feeling like what I was told is like the right way and like the good way actually was not.
There were no alternatives. It was just like,
like the one thing.
Yeah.
And then going, no, like that has left me feeling very exploited, feeling like I've put all this time, I've devoted my whole life to like a way of being that has left me completely, like I left nothing in the reserves for me.
Yeah.
Financially, like just even with my own time, what I built, like what I honored in my own human experience, just for me. And then going like, okay, how did I let that happen in the name of what I thought was honoring God? And that's that really tricky thing, like that being sold to us as like one thing.
Yeah.
And then, and again, it's not humans, like humans are doing this, but it's not like some person is like the bad guy saying this.
Yeah.
It's just like
there's many systems.
Prescribing like, oh yeah, don't protect yourself, and don't, if you're feeling like it's too much, give more. Like, again, kind of goes against like, not great. And if you don't do it, then maybe you're not good, or maybe you're not, God's not going to be pleased, or maybe you're a bad person.
Yes.
I don't know, right?
Which is hard for us to combat as humans.
Yeah.
So we do the things because we want to be loved by God. We want to be,
of these people.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's like where it's like, okay, well, so what does it actually mean to honor? For me, there was like, what does it mean to honor God, and like, who is God?
And in a way that like, I think sometimes we go like wholeness and truly being ourselves sometimes feels like otherworld, like maybe that isn't something we can fully have in this like lifetime.
Yeah.
But I think that's maybe a lie that we've told ourselves, because there is, I think, more wholeness than we kind of like let ourselves believe here, like in this world.
For sure.
Like in the next 40 years that we have. And
I
think that it might look a lot different than how we used to go about things.
Yeah.
So,
just going to the point of, I mean, but if you're emotionally burnt out, like if you're physically burnt out, you can't give to the people that you're actually like responsible for, or who are dependent on you.
Totally.
And like, that's where one of the things that, when Grant and I were involved, one of the main things we like, that sort of made us have pause for like, oh, can we do this? Was like having a kid, because we were like, wow, all of a sudden he takes up a lot of our resource, and I don't think we can keep like giving all that time and energy to the church where
you want
otherwise someone else
something to
totally.
We often are like, oh, I can get from an empty well.
Well, I think the choice was, though, as well, that we could keep doing that and we would just get help. with Asher,
right.
you know? So that's the option you have is like, oh no, it's totally doable.
Yeah.
Like everyone in ministry does that.
Right.
You can get help with kids, and like we've got plenty of volunteers, you know, to help with your kids.
More embedded in the system.
Yeah.
Too, right.
Where for me, it was just like, well, I want to, first and foremost, I feel like my kids are my responsibility. Like we decided to have them. So I feel like if anything, I am the one that needs to parent them.
Yeah.
And
that's like a grounding in, again, like knowing kind of your gut and going, okay, I might risk what other people think is like the best for our life, you know, and what's, again, holy or good or whatever. And you're like, no, I'm actually going to separate from this, knowing what I want actually matters.
Yeah.
Right. And again, knowing that what you felt in the past, which was like the draw was so much, right?
Yeah.
Like, woof, yeah, we're exhausted. Like we don't have much left, and going, I can't sustain that.
Yeah.
And if, like, I do see that, I mean, often, I think we said this before, like Micah's, everyone's like, why is Micah on the podcast? She's a good human. And I'm like, yes, she's a great human. But I think in many ways,
still a sinner.
Yeah. Thanks, Micah.
Sinner who needs grace.
But I just mean, like, I think in lots of ways you have risked going like, yeah, people might not understand, and they might go like, oh, that's not the good Micah that we used to see before, that, you know, would have given everything to be at church and have her kids raised in the church and like and subscribe to all of that stuff. And
or she's like, not living up to her potential.
Exactly.
Head in ministry.
Yeah. And you're like, no, I think I'm going to risk just whatever. Again, who cares what people say? But it matters within, like, we say that again on paper, who cares what they say?
Yeah. It's hard to live out.
Exactly. Because again, we've given over so much power and authority over, like, whether, for example, like whether I can get divorced or whether I can miss a Sunday or whether I have my kids go X, Y, or Z. Like, I've given that authority to the point where I have to like prove certain things to people when I go, no, I'm empty. I'm not okay. I don't feel good. I feel like I have no autonomy over my own self. Yeah. Like, that's enough. And I don't need to keep feeling like I have to prove it, because it's like, that is being exploited and that used against me to keep me again in places or feeling empty all the more further.
Yeah. And I think that's why I like looking at these systems as a whole is like something that I feel like, I don't know, I get really interested in doing that, because I mean, when we were part of that system, I also would have like, I mean, we had a title, we had a position, you know, and that came with certain perks. I'm going to put it bluntly, of I don't know, just people's like respect, which you hadn't necessarily earned, but they were giving it to you because you had a title.
And doesn't it feel good? It does you again, and
it does feel good, but like, we also, were like, whatever we were responsible for, we just had to fill those, you know, fill positions, get people there, and I would often feel that grading it against me. Like, I feel like all I'm doing is kind of just like putting people in positions and speaking at events, but I'm not actually like walking with people like in the daily. And that's what I think I always have, that's been most fulfilling for me, is always like just the like connecting with people, and like we would have called it pastoring. Like, the whole reason I wanted to be a pastor was because like
you wanted to be with you.
But like within the system we were in, that kind of was more of just
you were more disconnected, right?
Yeah. You just oversaw stuff.
Yeah, operations and things.
Yeah.
The actual human, again,
like interacting, and like, and making sure that even the people that were on our team, like, are they actually okay?
Totally.
Or is everyone, we're all just burnt out here and we're all just keeping on going? Because if we don't, our services literally fall apart.
Yeah.
Then we have no church.
Which again, like when we're in our like Christian world, would call it calling or whatever. But when you're sort of functioning the way like you were made to function, however you want to think about that, you feel fulfilled. You feel like, oh yeah, this is like, a beautiful thing.
Yes.
But when you're not, then you feel empty. And that, again, goes back to that something is being exploited. Something is like when you're not okay and you don't feel just a tiny bit of that wholeness, that joy. It's not about happiness. It's like that resting peace and the resting like, I've got enough energy again for the next day because I'm actually functioning in balance and like, having good human interaction, good rest. And that's huge. We talk about the Sabbath, but anyone really practice it? I don't know. I didn't. I mean, it was very hard. Even now, that's something that I struggle with.
Yeah. I mean, like one of the days we would take off work for is dedicated to another thing that you put on. And I mean, like, I think one of the ways that I started to realize maybe that the community wasn't actual community was like as soon as I dropped out of that world by having a kid, then I was like not there every day, not in everyone's faces, but I felt like I kind of just like dropped off the radar in a way where like people actually reaching out to me to be like, I mean, you get all the, which was really lovely, like you get the meals and the gifts when the baby's first born, but then the like, I realized like my world is like a completely different world from that world, and there's not really much bridging. So like your value really is tied to the within that church realm, and as soon as you're not there, it's like
forgotten. Totally,
pretty much.
Like, which is really strange because in order to re-engage that and what you had before, you actually have to
you have to go there. Like no one's kind of I mean, I'm not saying everyone was like that because I definitely had friends who were, visited and reached out, but my world did change so drastically. And they were everyone was still working full time and like involved in church, that I felt like I had to find different friends because they just didn't have time. Like all their time was used up in ministry. It is. And that's what I realized as well. Like, wait a minute, like I don't even, what friends do I have that are like, because I think you think of friends, like friends would like come and sit with you at your house or like bring you meals or like just be generally interested
with you.
And like your life. And when that doesn't happen, it's like, oh, well, were we even, what was our friendship based upon? And that's when I realized so much of it was just based on like the shared experience of what we were doing. And my value in the community was, I mean, we would have said, this wouldn't have been said at all, like it would have been said to the contrary, but based on what you're doing in church is kind of like, and so when your value is tied to that, it's like it's hard to give that up because that's where you get your value and worth from like filling these roles and doing these things.
And I think there's something to note that once you come out of that, the lack of, for one, you don't really have a job, and two, you feel, I think like there's some repairing and some building up again of who you are and your identity. And for me, it definitely felt very empty. And I think that's worth kind of going, what was that? Like, why have I not built myself up just to have like a normal baseline? Like, I don't mean anything exciting and fancy. I just mean like normal baseline kind of human, just regular value or whatever. And I think these are good conversations to have. Hopefully that strikes something up in our listeners and kind of going like, whatever system you're a part of, is there something, is it like mutually beneficial? Like, is there a mutual respect and, or is it just something that is totally draining you? And if it is, then it's okay to change that. It's okay to ask questions and to go, maybe something is up here.
I think it can be tricky when people are telling you that these things should fulfill you or like this is how you will be fulfilled as by
it's holy and from
God. And then when you don't feel that, that can be a weird place to be. Just so like, what next?
All right. Well, hopefully you guys are having good conversations out there. Thank you for joining us again.
Yes.
And on to next week. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.